The number of confirmed COVID-19 cases around the world has topped 2 million. Over 155,000 victims are dead. The numbers of people suffering physically, psychologically, and financially as a result are too high to count. How do we process a tragedy like this? How should we begin? How should we live into the resurrection at a time when death appears to be in charge? Is it still possible to hold the resurrection close to our hearts and minds? These kinds of questions actually predate COVID-19. We're hardly the first people to ask them. The first Sunday after Easter has always been a point in the Christian year when we take a good, hard look at God's post-resurrection world and think, now what? Or if we're really honest, so what? We're invited in this story to struggle alongside Thomas and to say the thing a lot of us feel. Unless we see him for ourselves, we won't believe. We're invited to feel skeptical, maybe even envious of those who find faith easier to sustain than we do, envious of those who, for whatever reason, don't feel a deep cognitive dissonance between the truth of the resurrection and the ongoing reality of death in the world. What intrigues me about this story is that Jesus appears to Thomas in a body that's scarred and wounded, a body that refuses to hide its suffering, sorrow, and brokenness. The wounds Jesus exposes are not old wounds. They're wounds so raw that the doubting disciple places his fingers inside of them. Maybe Jesus winces when Thomas touches him, but to me, the wincing signals real life. It signals real presence, real pain. It speaks the very words I hunger to hear. I am with you. I am with you where it hurts. I don't float thousands of feet above reality. Even after death, I am here, exactly where you dwell. Christians are expected to put a lot of stock in completed victories, value the race won, the mountain scaled, the enemy defeated, the obstacle overcome. We welcome so often stories of failure to an extent, but only when those stories are shared in retrospect, long after the worst is over. Sin that is surrendered to holiness is a Christian story, but sin that clings, challenges that won't ease up, a wound, physical, psychological, or relational, that remains, we squirm, we turn our eyes away, we worry. Jesus' wounded body is a reminder. Some hurts are for keeps. Some markers of pain, loss, trauma, and horror leave traces that nothing will take away. Some wounds remain, even after resurrection. And that's okay. It's okay to celebrate Christ's rising and grieve our catastrophic losses at the same time. It's okay to hear other people's uplifting faith stories and say, I'm happy for you, but my heart is still broken. It's okay to ache and to hold our ache in tension with the joys of Easter. This year, more than ever, I honor the wounds. Even though we're a resurrection people, we are still hurting. The world is still wounded. Regardless of where on the planet we live, we're still anticipating grief on a scale most of us have never experienced before. Ours is a faith of paradoxes. We Christians live by dying. receive by giving, and rule by serving others. Our job is not to collapse these paradoxes, but to honor their complexities and live fruitfully within them. Jesus' resurrected body still retains its scars. The other intriguing thing to me in this story is Thomas's faith. I mean, he often gets a bad rap, his reluctance to accept the testimony of the other disciples, his insistence on physical proof, his late arrival to the joyous belief of his peers. These are often described as spiritual flaws, as signs of stubbornness or a weak faith. I'm grateful for his honest skepticism, his doubt, his slow, methodical conversion. He reminds me that the resurrection story is hard to accept, hard to internalize, hard to apply to our lives, especially when our lives are marked by pain, loss, uncertainty, and death. I'm not the first human being to struggle with it. I won't be the last. When I look at Thomas, I see a human being who yearns for a living encounter with God, a person who can't settle for someone else's experience of resurrection, but sticks around in the hope of having his own. A person who dares to confess uncertainty in the midst of those who are absolutely certain. Thomas has to wait in suspense for a whole week after his friends first tell him they've seen Jesus. What's that like for him? Does Thomas pity the other disciples for what he fears are their delusions? Or does he fear, as I often do, that he's missed the memo, missed the boat, missed the glory? Does he wonder if he's destined only ever to know God secondhand? Does he ask why Christ won't come sooner for him? What strikes me about Thomas is not that he doubts, but that he does so publicly, without shame or guilt. The disciples allow him to voice his skepticism, name his yearning to see the risen Jesus with his own eyes. Though they freely share their testimonies with him, they also give him time, give him space to encounter Jesus on his own. Meanwhile, Jesus meets Thomas right where Thomas is, freely offering the testimony of his own wounds, his own pain. Wounds and doubts. Welcome to life in the shadow of the empty tomb. Sounds anticlimactic, I know, but when Thomas's doubts meet Jesus' wounds, new life erupts, faith blossoms, and the doubting Thomas becomes a messenger of the good news. Resurrection happens all over again. Now please go to the second portion, the second audio